What's going on, podcast listeners? My name is Michael Chernow. I am a restaurateur and lifestyle entrepreneur, and I am truly obsessed with living a life better than yesterday through wellness, fitness, and good vibes. I've always wondered if the drive to succeed is something we are born with, or if it's something that is made over time through grit, drive, and perseverance. I get to answer that question exactly, and the goal of this podcast is to talk with people that have absolutely crushed it in life and have inspired me to do the same. This is Born or Made. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Born or Made podcast. I am delighted today to be sitting down with a guy who has inspired me in many ways. First of all, he has a business that is truly groundbreaking, inspirational, and totally helping people live lives better than yesterday, which is what this podcast is about for the most part. But Michael Wystrach, and I also want to just say something when I asked him how to pronounce his last name. He said, just think of me as wise and attractive. And so that's how I got the Wystrach down on my first go, which is pretty awesome. But Mike Wystrach is the CEO and founder of Freshly. It is a all-natural, all-fresh, at-home meal delivery business that is truly at the top of the triangle. They are so impressive, and they have done so many incredible things that have really outperformed the competition in his world, which is a very, very difficult world to play in. Mike has also done a number of other things throughout his career. He was in real estate. He was in finance. He actually had his own restaurant. So I can't wait to get to ask a bunch of questions, get his story, because I'm sure his story is an awesome one to hear and listen to. Michael, CEO and founder of Freshly, welcome to the show.
Hey, well, thanks a ton for having me on. I'm really excited to have the conversation and share some of my story, and hopefully someone will take a nugget of wisdom out of this conversation.
Yeah, I can guarantee you that. Would you do us a favor? Would you just give us an intro? Give us a quick intro of who you are, because I'm sure you can do it a little bit better than I did.
Yeah, no, you did a good job. And as you said, I actually grew up in a restaurant family. My parents bought our first restaurant when I was a month old. They still own that restaurant today. So, and we grew up on a ranch in Southern Arizona. So I like to say we were doing farm to table before farm to table was cool. But I really, from a young age, got kind of the 360 view of the food world and landscape, and grew up working every single position in the restaurant. We made the mistake at the young age of 10 to beg our parents to let us bus. And for those of you who don't know, those of you who have families who own businesses know that child labor does not protect you if your parents own the business. So we begged, and then from there on out, we were free labor. So, but really, I loved working the restaurant. It taught me so much. I got the experience of working as a busser, dishwasher, prep, line chef, grill chef, bartender, waiter, manager, every position you can work, and realized after getting through college, I said, I want to get as far away from food as possible, and went into investment banking. After working for a few years in investment banking in corporate America, I realized that the passion for entrepreneurship was just too strong. The force was too strong inside me. So went back and worked for my parents. And I always tell people the only thing worse than corporate America is family America. And did that for a few years and separated and started doing some of my own stuff, which kind of combined a lot of my passions. So it was real estate, it was technology, a lot of different ventures, and in the process built and launched my own restaurant with my parents, and started Freshly really not trying to build a business. It was actually I had like 15 businesses going, and this wasn't a business. This was solving my challenge, which is I left New York. The one thing I took away from New York out of a lot of debt. So two things. I took a lot of debt out of New York, and I also took a passion for takeout. And as you know, or as a lot of your listeners know, that is not necessarily often the building blocks for a great healthy diet. But at a young age, you can kind of outwork a bad diet, and then you hit 30 and that's no longer possible. And so I started working with a really good family friend of mine who was an ER doctor by training. And about 25 years ago, he got really frustrated with kind of Western medicine, and he felt like he was just a drug dispenser. And he really wanted to get to kind of disease prevention versus disease treatment. And he wanted to help people. And funny enough, he was kind of transformed back to Eastern medicine around like kind of food and diet and meditation and all these things that kind of traditionally are Eastern medicine. And he basically became like an advocate of the paleo diet before it was called the paleo diet. So long story short, what I'm really good at is connecting the dots. So I had my chefs who were awesome, and I had this doctor who was amazing. And I said, okay, well, why don't I cut myself out of this? You just give me all the ingredients, everything I should be eating, and I'm just going to have the chefs who are really good at creating food create me meals to go. And like, if what you say is true, then like, I don't need to do the work. I don't need to count calories. I don't need to count carbs. I'll just have these guys do the work for me. I'll put it in to-go kits, heat it up, and fast forward 60 days, best shape of my life. Like, kind of, I went into as kind of the naysayer, like, oh, food, it's calorie in, calorie out. Like, this is kind of a solved problem. Like, I just need to eat less, skip lunch, skip dinner. That was kind of like my go-to, is like, just skip meals, and not in like a fasting kind of, intermediate fasting. It was just like, oh, I'm just less calories. So long story short, I'm in great shape for the first time ever. I'm not thinking about caloric intake or carbs and these things. And I realized, like, wow, like, this is an amazing service. I love it. And my dad started asking me to do it for him, and other people started saying, hey, do it for me. And kind of the light bulb was like, oh, I've got a restaurant that is, only really utilized at 2 peak times of the day. And I'm always kind of a grinder. So I was like, hey, we'll turn the lights on starting at like 11 o'clock at night when the restaurant kind of shut down at 10, and just crank all the way through to the morning and do all basically like a dark kitchen before dark kitchens existed. And that's how we built Freshly. It was really on this idea of like, how can we make it unbelievably easy for people like me who didn't know anything about nutrition, weren't great cooks, even though I've grown up in kind of a food background. I just really didn't have a passion. I love great food, but I'm not like a passionate chef. But I love kind of, like so many people, it's like, I love eating good food. So it's like, how do I get great food that's healthy for me without me doing the work? And that's really what we built Freshly on. It was kind of this simple idea. And I think it was, people always say, scratch your own itch. It's like the best startup, because like you're just trying to solve your challenge, your problem. And that was really the fun about Freshly. We started in 2015, and we've been fortunate enough to grow it to a really fun business. And I think, again, as a fun business, is we love like the scale and what we're doing, but most importantly is the people we're around every day. And like, I think the family that we built within Freshly has been an amazing journey, and had a ton of fun. So that was a long introduction to me.
No, man, that was wonderful. Hearing stories like that is ultimately what I think keeps everybody excited to take a step, right? I mean, when you hear a story like that, there are people that are listening that could be potentially sitting in a very similar situation than you were before you launched Freshly, right? And I know firsthand how challenging the restaurant business is. And I love the idea of your business. I absolutely love the idea of your business, but I just know how difficult it is. I mean, what you're doing, it's hard enough getting fresh, delicious food from the kitchen in a restaurant to a table. Getting fresh, delicious food from a kitchen. Where's your home base?
So we're headquartered in New York, but we have facilities now in LA, Arizona, Maryland, and New Jersey, soon Texas and Atlanta as well. But right now we're located there.
Yeah. So getting food from 4 currently kitchens to homes across the nation is very difficult. Not frozen, right? So what you're doing is unbelievable. And
it's been fun.
I mean, being able to get healthy food to people on a regular basis is, I think, ultimately the future. It is the future.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree. And I think another anecdote, I think, especially poignant in this time for people listening, I think, a little more background on that kind of. So I opened my restaurant we opened in February 2008. Which short of the coronavirus and COVID so it's now the second, but for a long time it was the worst time ever to open a new business going into the Great Recession. And to be honest, the business was failing drastically. I mean, it ultimately did fail, but the reason Freshly was kind of the idea expanded into business is I had this failing business and I was just scrambling to say like, shit, how do I make payroll? How do I pay rent? And kind of Freshly was one of those things. And so we knew we had to lean in, but just in that, I think sometimes like people see these paths and they kind of think like, it was clear cut, and so to give just a frame of reference where I was.
Okay, wait, before you do that, I want to ask you something about failing, because I think it's really important. And if you could do me a favor and try to really go back to that time when you knew that your business was failing. Can you describe what that felt like, forgetting about Freshly and being able to pivot the way you have so successfully? And I'm sure that there's a bunch of bumps that we could talk about along that road as well, along the pivot road, but pre-pivot, what did that feel like?
Well, so one, I'm a type A personality. I'm highly competitive. So failure for me is not like, I hate failure. And for me, failure is embarrassing. It's all the things that you would imagine. And so at that time, kind of, I felt like a failure. I felt like the thing that I set out to do wasn't working. It was failing. I had investors, including my parents and a lot of other people in the business. And while they were all big boys and big girls and they knew what they were getting into, they were really betting on me. So the failure at that point was really, it was all encompassing. I think those of you who've been through a business that's failing, and especially at that point, my options were very narrow, and really like the option was like bankruptcy. And really my parents kind of kept me out last minute. Everything was compiling and it was dark. And I remember.
How long after you launched the business did you know that it was going to fail in your gut?
So we started off really, really strong in the first 6 months. And then kind of the depth of recession started for us, at least in kind of 2009. And we really felt like revenue drop. And, it was, I think for a lot of people, it's like the recession started in 8, but really for us in Arizona, at least hit in 9 and 10 were really the dark years. And so I was able to like kick the can down the road long enough, and we didn't actually end up shutting the business down until 13. But it was clear by like 10 that it was going to be tough sailing, and we just weren't catching the momentum. And by like 11 and 12, it was just like scrambling. So like I was working, I was working the manager, I was working the bartender, I was doing like everything just to minimize as much as possible. And then we were reworking and restructuring with landlords and debt, all sorts of stuff. And we did that. And, I think the hardest thing for me was by the time we got to kind of 12 and end of 12 was when we shut down, was, really coming to grips with like, there was no kind of turnaround for this business, and just taking, it's kind of like a breakup or anything else. It's the hardest and also, but the most relieving day of just saying, hey, it's not going to make it. We've got to switch to kind of a shutdown. Now,
let me just ask you one question there, because that's a great moment. So that time when you're like, you know what, we've taken this thing as far as we can take it, we have to pull the plug on this. Knowing what you know now, would you have pulled the plug sooner? Or do you think that do you think that you learned an enormous amount throughout that period of time when you were really struggling to keep the place afloat? Or would you have pulled the plug sooner?
Well, in hindsight, it kind of double pronged, because I was able to start Freshly in the kitchen, and we were able to kind of really get Freshly going. So keeping the business alive was certainly a blessing. I think the kind of franticness that I had of like just trying any way possible to like get ends meet, ultimately like made me reach and made me think. So I think if I would have capitulated too early, in this case, it wouldn't have been beneficial. Now where I'm at, if I was in that same situation, I would have shut a lot earlier. I think, but I also would have came in with a very different mindset. I would have communicated very differently to investors. So I think part of it is the maturity of of going through a business and realizing a lot that I didn't have at that time. And I really did see the business as me and me as the business. And so kind of it was too hard for me to separate failure of the business versus me failing. And as I've grown, is I've seen as with Freshly is, well, I set out to do Freshly a lot different in a lot of different ways. But big thing was, as I bring in investors, is really bring in professional investors who are prepared, are understanding, and very aware of risk. And a big part of this process was we did bring in some early friends and family, but we paid them back immediately. And we had them kind of at least get their money back. So they were playing on the house's money. And that was really important for us from kind of a personal stress level. And we really wanted professional investors who knew the risk they were getting into. And we're kind of, for lack of better terms, playing with the house's money or LP's money in this case. And that was a learning lesson. But I think, thank God I didn't, and thank God I struggled for as long as I did and got there. And really, thank God, my parents took a swinger on me, because when we shut the restaurant, we got hit with like all sorts of stuff. So we were more than $2.5 million in debt coming out of that. We had a judgment for $1 million, and my dad is just a genius at structuring stuff. We've got he basically delayed, and I still remember we got the judgment filed against us. I was sitting on a court bench with him. He looked over at me and said, "Well, you got a plan to make $1 million?" And I said, "I think I do." So he said, "All right, I hope you're right, kid." So fast forward, I think probably one of the greatest successes in my life with Freshly was the ability 3 years in to actually pay that off, and to be able to work with investors. We did a small secondary, but I paid that off, and that was like, my dad and my mom took a huge bet on me, and we kind of collectively went in this. So, but like hindsight, you always look back and say like, oh yeah, well that was an easy bet. Like it was such a hard bet, and my parents went to bat so much for me and really believed in kind of, I think, me. And I think that's what I'd say with a lot of the people who've backed or invested. I've always tried to make sure that, on other things, I rolled a bunch of people into Freshly, because I said, okay, hey, look, you bet on me here and it didn't work, but I promise you this one's going to work. So we rolled them into there, and that's been great, because all of them made way more money than they ever thought they were going to make. And I think, as you look at a journey is in a business is you want success. There's a great line in J. Cole, I think his new song, Middle, that he says, what's the point of flying first class if your friends can't fly with you, right? Like, and part of life is that journey of bringing your friends, your family, the people who invested and believed in you along on that journey. And I think that's been fun. But like, again, I think for those of you who are having a tough time, and this certainly is an insane economy, and this is, again, I thought 2008 was tough. This is kind of the landslide of all landslides. Is I love, there's a line of, I think it's from Alcohol Anonymous, but this too shall pass, right? And just the memory that like life looks the darkest right before the sun pops up, and like that, I just kept having to remind myself. It was funny, I was going through, you guys sent out a list of like books. I had different books, but a book called The Remnants of a Stock Trader. It's an old book.
I just started that book.
But the amazing thing is the guy he loses all of his money. He loses everyone's money. And he basically has a set of mental outlook in his mind that he will pay everyone back, but he has to be successful. So he retrades and he resets his mind on basically saying, I'm starting with a clean slate. All these people who I owe money to or whatever, I'm going to pay them back. But if I keep holding that on. So I still remember listening to that book. I'm a big audiobook. And I remember listening to that book and taking that mindset of like, okay, I got to erase kind of the early failures. I got to reset the level playing field and then go back at it. And I think that was a key kind of mindset for me, is that takeaway of like, I'm back to zero and I'm going to start over, and I know I'm going to like nail it. And like, I felt really confident in where I was. I felt like, all my learning lessons, I would, I'd never like to relive them again, but I'm glad I went through them. And it's like, I got the most expensive MBA in the history of all MBAs was with that restaurant.
Yeah. For me, I think going through, and I've had some great successes, and I've also had some failures. And I just know that the secret, as far as I'm concerned, the real magic, the potion is in the failures. as far as I'm concerned, I believe that some of my greatest learning has happened in the the depths of pain and suffering for me, and that sounds pretty grim, but I will say that I've certainly dug very deep when I'm at the bottom of the pit. I pull out a shovel and I tend to dig to dig a little deeper. And then, the beauty of that is, you can't find gold unless you dig. And so I know that I love hearing stories of lessons as opposed to failures, because I think, the way we perceive a failure could be catastrophic and end it all, or it could be an opportunity for the team to huddle up to say, hey, we didn't win this one, but it's our time now. And I think that empowers, I've worked with a lot of people over the years, and I think the hardest for me as just a generally optimistic, super positive guy, negative situations, very challenging, hard, grueling situations are like my oxygen. I absolutely love sifting through the shit. I remember very clearly, we opened up a restaurant in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, our second restaurant. This is like 2010. And it was friend and family. Everything was perfect. I mean, the restaurant looked amazing and we were on fire. And we opened up the restaurant. It was a friend and family night. There was press there. And all of a sudden, it was dumping, pouring rain. And we hadn't had the restaurant open in a massive rainstorm. And the grease trap and the sewage lines just exploded. And literally exploded. And there was, 8 inches of shit on the floor in the kitchen downstairs. We had to tell everybody to go home. And I was literally trudging through the shit because we had no choice. We had to figure out what we were going to do. And I just remember in my mind just laughing at the fact that I've got zero control over this situation. How I respond to this situation is ultimately what's going to determine the success or failure of how my team feels. And that was such an experience for me, so clear when I close my eyes and think about it, that I stopped myself because my business partner was losing his shit. He was completely out of control and screaming and yelling and I just said, this is a really great opportunity for me to pause and respond as opposed to react and totally destroy. And, I love asking people about their failures.
The key with failure is you have to learn from failure, right? And, I always say to our team, and I'm a big believer in this, is like, there's two types of people in the world. There's types of people who go through the world believing that the world happens to them. And there's types of people who believe that they happen to the world. And the difference is that every failure, whether, I caused it or not, there's a learning lesson in there. And every single thing that happens, I try to say, okay, what do I get to take away from this? How do I prevent this? How do I make this? And again, these are hard when you open a restaurant in a recession, like should I predict that? But no, there's a lot of things when you actually take accountability, full stop accountability. Jocko talks about it. It's like, absolute ownership. How do you just say, okay, no, I own everything I do. And then that gives you that ability, as you said, is when you change that mindset to how I respond to this situation. Like, were you the person who installed the grease trap? And I doubt it. But nonetheless, you're dealt with that situation. You have to respond. And that's where the choice is. I think that's when I always look back at going back on the failures and the restaurant and these things is I always tell our team, everyone's allowed to make a mistake. You just can't make the same mistake twice, right? So every time we mess up, we got to learn from that. And then we got to make sure that we're not going, because there's so many new mistakes to be made, right? So it's like there's no time in life to make the same mistake twice because there's so many more that you're going to make. And that's really been my key in failure is like, I'm okay with failure. I'm pretty, I don't like it. I don't actually go and be proud of it, but I'm okay with it as long as I know, okay, I got to learn from this. I can't make the same mistake. And I really challenge, that's been big ethos of Fresh Day. And I think it's a big part of what's made us successful is that mindset of we're allowed failure. We're not afraid of failure. We just don't make it twice.
So you don't make it twice, and that's bold. I will say, because I'm certainly I cannot say that I have not made the same mistake more than once, and that's
Well,
just
I'm sitting here saying that's my goal and objective. Now, is that reality? Probably not.
what what are your thoughts on partnership? Because I know partnership has not been an easy thing for me, and again, like you bring up Jocko Willink, which I mean, that guy, I've got discipline equals freedom tattooed on my hand, actually, because I love his philosophy and mentality. But you've had partners, or you have partners. How would you sort of discuss your best practices when it comes to partnerships?
Well, I think partnerships is like any relationship in life. Now, I think what's fun about business partnerships is they're actually structured a lot more logically, right? So in marriage, if you go and you sign a prenup, like someone's gonna be like, oh my God, it's not a friendly conversation. But really in business, the best thing to do is get a really good operating agreement and go through, and that's really what you do in the event of kind of doing a prenup, is you go through all the scenarios that no one is anticipating, no one wants, right? But you do it at a very level, clean, because the reality of partnerships is with anything, again, marriage or anything, is just that people are going to grow, evolve, change. The business is going to evolve and change, and there's all sorts of different stuff that's going to happen. So the great thing about operating agreements and partnerships, or whatever document you're going to use, is really going down the edge cases of what happens in life. So what happens, Michael, if I want to keep going, but you want to sell your shares? What happens if you wake up and say, I don't want to do this anymore? Well, that's never going to happen. Well, perfect. Then let's deal with the situation now in the event it doesn't. Because what you end up seeing is people are very rational at the beginning, because they think all rosy, everything's going to be perfect. And then you go down these paths, and there's different life and different expectations. And maybe together today, Michael, we said we're going to start a restaurant. We both agree we're going to do 50-50 of our time. And I say to you, well, what happens if you say, I want to do podcasts full time and I'm leaving? And you say, well, I'd sell you my shares at blah, blah, blah. But the reality is we fast forward in 2 years and the restaurant's killing it and it's worth way more, and we don't have an agreement in place. Well, your expectations change, mine change. And so we get a misalignment of expectation. I think key to life and partnerships is meeting expectations. And the challenging thing, and I have to say with my partner, he's so good at this. And we've evolved kind of our partnership, but he's really good thinking through kind of like the inevitable and removing emotion. And it's really hard. Again, in life, it's just hard in general. In partnerships and business and these things, it's hard to step back and remove emotion. And it's hard. We all unfortunately have our own cognitive bias of the way we see the world. And we think that, fundamentally is the right way of the world actually exists in the parameters that we set out as we maybe age, or sometimes not, is that like, there are many ways to see the same exact situation. So I think good partnership agreements, and then also open communication along the line. And again, like the challenging things with partnerships is the world does evolve, and it means that not everyone is going to be happy as the world evolves, or different things. But I think transparent communication and trying to do the right thing. And again, I think of partnerships as any other relationship in life, right? Whether it's a friend or your wife or significant others or husband, whatever that may be. Generally, the good rules of any successful relationship is the same thing: communication, honesty, transparency, trying to think when you're not emotionally responding. It's like the spouse who catches the husband or wife cheating is no longer thinking equitable and fair, right? It's like, no, I'm going to screw you, you're done. And I think those are the things that you can kind of have the logical conversation, because again, at the beginning of a marriage, you say, okay, well, what happens if you cheat on me? Oh, well, honey, I never cheat on you. Okay, well, let's just deal with this. How would you think a fair way of dividing our assets would be if you did? And oh, well, you should take what you have. And so it's funny, you go through these things before, when there's no, in everyone's mind, it's never going to happen. And you go down the list. And again, that's a long answer to a very short question. But partnerships, like anything else in life, are difficult.
I think, I love the long answer. I think partnerships are something that people speak far too less about, because I do believe that, I always correlate the sort of metaphor of, you're your favorite band growing up, like the best band ever, and then they just fall off the face of the planet, and you don't hear another album from them ever again, and you're like, whatever happened to those guys? And they're like, oh, the band didn't get along, they broke up, and you're like, it was such a great band. Like, how is it possible?
Making a ton of money, you're like, what's going on?
How is it possible? And so I think that that's an easier, sort of more palatable way for people to appreciate what we're talking about here, because partnerships are, quite frankly, they could be the greatest thing for a business, but in a lot of cases, they end up being the end of a business. And it's a shame. And so I read a book early on called The E-Myth Revisited by this guy named Michael Gerber. And he really sort of distinguished a great way to delineate labor amongst partnerships, and also really put an emphasis on the idea of creating a great partnership agreement, which I think you honed in on right away. You mentioned communication, and I think communication happens to be probably the glue to keeping businesses successful and aligned, for partnerships and also for leadership and staff. So do you guys have some tips and tricks, or do you have sort of a general way of communicating with your partner and also with your crew, your team?
There's a few different things. So I think I think one of the challenging things and this is, I think the other thing people kind of need to understand is that depending on the route and the business you choose, partnerships play out differently. So, in our world of kind of venture-backed businesses, your founder kind of evolves into an org chart, right? The org chart, you got to think about which means usually that there's one boss, right? So the CEO, so that's really clear, and that's always a difficult transformation from kind of co-founders to kind of a singular boss. Now, eventually, and I think if you look at the S&P 500, I think there's maybe one or two co-CEOs in the S&P 500. If you look at the Russell 2000, it's probably still the same number. Usually doesn't last that long because it's hard to have two heads at the top of any organization. From a communication structure, I would talk very transparently with, I think now as we look at our partnership agreement is our, what we would say is our partners, is kind of multiple constituents, right? So we have our partners as our investors, our partners as our employees, our partners as our customers, right? So, and we all look at them as partners in the Freshly journey and these things. So communication all starts in alignment, clear understanding. And then, so when we think about from the employee standpoint, because I think that's what you were saying, kind of communication with our executive team and our employees, is we spend a lot of time just making sure everyone knows where we're going, what's important to us. We've done a lot of work on our core values. We re-accentuate those through every aspect of the business. And again, I think when people say that is like culture is a lot of little things, but at the end of the day, culture is who you are, what you're doing, and why you do it, right? So I think communication starts with culture. It starts with that transparency, starts with understanding. And then from a tactical standpoint, we communicate a lot. So from weekly emails to weekly calls to stand-ups to all hands. And as we get bigger and bigger, we realize that there is no such thing as too much communication. And we keep getting more and more communication because someone gave me the advice, and then it's really good for me as I've grown and evolved as a CEO, is by the time you think you're saying it too much is when you're just starting to say it enough, right? So you really got to lean into comms and make sure, because you realize that, we got 2,000 people in our organization now, and we need everyone kind of marching to the same kind of area. And, I become now like on a row, like a big sailboat, those big rowing boats where you have someone beating the drum at the front and like just keeping cadence. And that's really my job, is I'm just beating the drum and making sure that everyone's keeping cadence in the organization.
Can I just stop you for a second? Dude,
yep.
You have a fucking 2,000 person company.
We have a big organization. Yes.
Mike, that's incredible.
Thank you.
It's incredible, man. Like, what is... I know you're so in it, and I can only imagine right now we're sitting in a pandemic. This episode will probably launch while we're still sitting in a pandemic. I can only imagine your business is through the roof because you are delivering fresh, delicious, natural, healthy food to people at home. You are helping so many people. Like truly, not only are you employing 2,000 people, but you're helping so many people live a life better than yesterday. And I can't. I'm floored by how sort of humble you are about that. You just threw it out there. I've got, we have 2,000 people on our team, and I'm like, dude, it's insane. It's incredible. It's amazing what you're doing.
So one, I appreciate that, but two, I think the humbleness comes from, as you know, as a founder, you're kind of, my hard work is done in the first year, 2 years, and really now is the amazing thing is like, again, it goes back to those constituents we have, the customers, employees, investors, and I think COVID was, for so many people, was the toughest time we've ever dealt with, because our customers, when you look at our customers, 20% of our customers are older than 65. So they were the heaviest at-risk population. We're going to do close to 50 million meals this year. So we have people who depend on our product all across the US. And we had to take the challenge and face the challenge as the early days of COVID, with really a lack of kind of unified response on how we should be responding to kind of COVID. We just had an insanely dedicated team across the board to be extraordinarily forward thinking on how we responded for our employee safety, making sure we got those meals out. We were one of the first organizations in the US to have temperature screening up front. We had teams following China and Asia to see what they were doing there, because we knew that they were ahead of us. We secured stock right after it was allowed to open for face masks. 4 weeks before the CDC said that face masks were a good thing, we launched and we're providing face masks for every single one of our employees in our facility. And I feel really proud, because if you look across kind of the food industry and the challenges that were happening, is we fared kind of best of breed. And really that was insane hard work on a team of 2,000 people. So I felt tremendously honored, humbled to be part of that organization, to lead the organization, who really, then there were days, as I'm sure across the board, there were 20-hour days where people, were tracking things, we were doing stuff, and for the first time ever, we had an ununited states as far as we were seeing. We had as the benefit is we had 4 different facilities operating, but we had 4 different governors doing different things and mandates, and we had teams tracking the CDC. We had teams on phones with our state senators and really trying to understand, hey, what do we need to be doing? How do we need to be doing it? And again, across the board, we had our Maryland facility was inspected 2 days after the governor of Maryland gave a mandate for all facilities that were actually operating. It was just published to the website. And we passed with flying colors, and we're actually set out to be kind of a trainer to help people kind of train through that. So look, as these times, as insane as they've been, is really for me is as a leader, is you really get to see the power of your organization in times like this. You get to see that the great people we already knew were great, responding and working amazingly. And again, that goes from every person in our organization. It was a really phenomenal time for our team. And I was like a proud parent. I've been beaming. Now, COVID is another one of those great examples of something that I can't wait till we're through this. While the business has not done horrible, it has been one of the most stressful times as the rest of the world is certainly facing this. And my heart goes out, again, coming from a restaurant. My parents still own a restaurant, the challenges they've been facing. So to all restaurateurs out there, my heart is with you. I'm still a restaurateur at heart. And I think it's been such a challenging thing to see from an outsider. And hopefully we get through this and the world picks back up to normal here.
Yeah. We closed, we will have closed a few restaurants in the city. It's just crazy times. To hear about the businesses that were from the outside looked like they were flourishing, and to read on, Eater that they're gone forever. It's sad. It's sad. I really hope the whole dynamic doesn't completely change forever. And I believe in my heart of hearts that human beings do crave experience. And now we know they certainly do crave convenience. And so you got the convenience component covered. but the experience component is still something that I believe human beings are always going to want. And so, I think we're in a little bit of a global reset. I do believe that we'll come out of this thing in a better place, because I think people have also been given an opportunity to potentially look at their priorities and understand that priorities are a little skewed. I certainly have. There's no doubt about it. I want to talk to you about your personal health and wellness. I know that you're a fitness guy, and I believe that you are a paleo participant. So do you think that your personal, well, we know that now, hearing your story, that your personal fitness and wellness journey have helped shape Freshly, if not actually shaped Freshly, but have they changed at all throughout this journey for you, or are they pretty similar?
Yeah, I think they're similar. I think I would say that I'm a fitness fan. I'd call you more of a fitness fanatic, in that you're doing way more disciplined. My co-founder Carter is really in our group is really the fitness fanatic. He's very disciplined, but he's passionate. He's super passionate about health, nutrition. His dad is actually the ER doctor who kind of was my early doctor on the paleo diet. So I'm a huge fan. I think if I look at, I'd say paleo keto is kind of roughly where I go in and out of. And I'm somewhat of a paleo keto cheat, in that I love ice cream, and I'll sometimes I'll go laps I love ice cream and a good beer as well. So neither of those fit into either one of those diets. But so I lapse in and out. But I think at the end of the day, what I realized for me, and I always say, like, people say, well, were you a nutritionist? Were you an avid cook? And I was like, no. And they're like, well, why did you start Freshly? I was like, I was customer number one. So I'm still like, my big belief is that like health is just way too complicated in America. And it's a failed philosophy to think that every American, or even in the world, is going to be like a fitness fanatic. Like, I'm a finance fanatic. I love like finance and business. What's been great about the Freshly journey is, like, Carter in our early days was the fitness fanatic enthusiast. His dad was, and I was just the beneficiary of their knowledge. And I think that's really when we think about Freshly, is like, how do we create a platform similar to what we've seen in technology, where, like, I don't know anything about iPhone or the right mobile encryption, but I'm sure happy Apple does, and I'm sure happy they pay a lot of attention to that stuff. So I get the benefit of it. And that's what we're trying to bring back to food. And I think is this idea of like a fiduciary working on behalf of their customers. And really, again, it's the foundation of, you think about like our money system, right? You think about the investors and those things. It's the foundation. It's literally required. If you want to be a financial advisor, you have to literally sign off on fiduciary responsibility. But for some reason with food, we've kind of said, okay, it's okay if you can put poison in the product as long as you label it, right? And it's kind of, it's baffling, because it's like, oh, buyer beware, but the buyer doesn't know. Most of it is media marketing. So really what we set out with Freshly is like, hey, what if we had really smart nutritionists and people who were really cared about these things, and all they did is spend all their time thinking about these things, and then people like myself got the benefit of it. So I've just been I've been like a net beneficiary of Freshly, in that, like, I love the product because it's like, it puts me on the easy mode, and like I've always been an athlete, so I love CrossFit. Now I'm a Shred app user, which I love because I do CrossFit now, my own CrossFit in the basement. So Shred has been a good app for me. And I'm a golfer, and, I love running. So, at a certain age, and I'll tell you, those of you who aren't 30 yet, watch out. At a certain age, you can't outwork a bad diet. And I realized that, like, I put in all this work in, and I wanted the results, and I wanted to feel good, and I wanted to feel healthy. And if I just started eating better, then I saw the benefits. So now I'm hooked on healthy eating, as so many people are. Is like, you just do it and you're like, wow, I could feel this good. I could feel this much energy. I could feel this much. And what you really realize is, like, for me is, like, as you can see, a ton of output, right? And that output is good or bad based on the quality of the fuel I put in. And I'll tell you right now, if I eat healthy, if I get into a really healthy zone, like my thinking's better, my emotional response is better, everything is just better. So for me, eating healthy has been addictive, to the point where, like, when I get unhealthy, I start, like, being very critical of myself, and I have to, like, get very disciplined again, because I'm addicted to that feeling. I think that's the exciting thing. Those of you who aren't eating healthy, I challenge you, 30 days, you can do Whole30, you can do Freshly, you can do keto, you can do paleo, you could just make some goals of eliminating sugar and processed carbohydrates, do that for 30 days. come back and just challenge yourself. How much better do you feel, and how much better does that kind of fuel your life? Because it really is. Food is the fuel for our lives. It doesn't mean be metaphorical. This is the reality of food is what makes you go. And the quality of that fuel is ultimately the quality of your life.
And for anybody listening, choices are what determine success and failure. Period and done. There is nothing else. Like I said earlier, I believe that, I know we cannot control the elements. However, we do have a choice and an ability to make a decision. And so our choices are what determine success and failure in anything and everything that we do. And so those moments right there where you've had such a great day, you ate a great healthy breakfast, you ate a great healthy lunch, you worked out, you're at home, Netflix is on, and it all falls to shit. and I know it so well. And so I think that that's such a great, polarizing moment, because you're right. When you're on the beam and you're eating well and you're moving your body, you're unstoppable. I want to talk to you quickly, one of the last few things that we'll touch on here, about habits. I believe in habits, good and bad. Do you have any habits that you do on a consistent, regular basis that help you be the guy you are today?
Yeah, so I think Power Habits is one. There's a book called Power Habits, which is amazing. Read it. Is kind of key to success. And I think you nailed it there. Is I think of habits, good and bad, as crutches. Right now, the great thing about good habits is they can help you through the crutches and changing and acknowledging it. Unfortunately, most of our lives come down to kind of habits, right? So we fall back in the same stuff. So for me, habits, it starts at the beginning of the day. So I get up roughly at the same time every day. So now that's a little later now with COVID because I'm not traveling at all, but that's 5:30 every morning. It used to be 4:45, but 5:30.
What time do you go to bed?
Now with a little one, I'm in bed asleep at 10. So 9:30 usually in bed. I used to be a little more strict when it was just me and no little one. But it used to be 9. I'm a big believer in minimum 8 hours of sleep. So I really go for that 8 hours of sleep. 7.5 is kind of where I'll stretch it.
What is your sort of system that just puts you in bed by 9:30?
I'm fairly lucky in that I'm a good sleeper, but it all starts out, if I get up at 5:30, I go get a workout in. So I get my morning workout in. To me, that's really key. I try to be disciplined in that. Certainly I have good days and bad days there, but I can notice a complete shift in the rest of my day from how I respond. I find myself a lot less emotionally responsive to things. Usually that presents itself in frustration or anger if I get that morning workout in. Second habit from there is, so I get that morning workout. I read the Wall Street Journal every day religiously. That's a habit or obsession, whatever it is. That's kind of how I start my day. That kind of sets the foundation for me. I got rid of talking about negative habits. I found myself strangely in this weird habit, as so many of us are, of checking Instagram and Facebook as if I gave a shit what everyone in the world was saying. So I deleted those apps about a year ago off my phone. It's been amazing for me. I found myself just spending so much time on Instagram, kind of rolling through. So for me, that was a beneficial habit. That was a painful one to break, and I deleted it. And I found myself just opening my phone and being like, I don't know what I'm going to. So I got out that I try to, and I go kind of cycle in and out of doing meditation. Right now I'm in a streak where I haven't been doing it, but I try to do that. I find that beneficial, but meditation, for whatever reason, it's hard to.
And does that meditation typically happen after the Wall Street Journal?
Usually right before the Wall Street Journal. So I'll come in, I go into my office, I kind of settle down for 10 minutes. I like a gratitude meditation where I just spend time kind of thinking about things I'm thankful for. And again, there's all sorts of different gratitude meditation, but I think so often things like COVID really set perspective of we're not thankful of going out to drinks with our friends. We're not thankful of an amazing dinner. We're not thankful of a wedding celebration. And these things are really magical. And we so often when we see a reshift in life, we realize that we go through life without being thankful for the small things. And I think we chase big thing to big thing. And then, especially tend to be a type A person. I not even spend enough time on the big things. But what I realize is the beauty of life is in the tiny little things. It's in the sunsets, the walks, the kiss from a dog, a kiss from your baby. I constantly have to make sure that I spend time thankful for everything we have. I think so often it's easy to be spend time on the negative. I think especially with the news cycle now is you get just caught into this negative cycle. And a lot of time it's refreshing into the positivity of the world. And so I try to do that. I think the last one is mindset. What I've seen for me, my day becomes very unpredictable after 9 a.m., whether it's family, work, and these things. So I try to put everything in kind of habits into the front. And then some things that, like you said, which is really key and Freshly really helps me, is like when I want to eat healthy, like meal prep is really crucial, right? So a lot of the times when you have bad habits is working around those. So like if, for example, every time after dinner you like an ice cream, guilty, right? Like create a new habit. So like what you realize is your mind is a trigger mechanism, and it says, okay, dinner done, ice cream time. So you can actually re-trigger. And I think this is, again, Power Habit, great book. But you can, or Atomic Habits, another probably even better book on that. But you can re-trigger your mind. And you can then say, okay, every time after dinner, I'm going to go for a walk, right? So I'm just going to go for a walk, not a workout, just a walk, family walk, whatever those things may be. I just maybe walk around the block, whatever that may be. You will find after 28 days, your mind becomes addicted to that walk. And it relates that walk into kind of this post-relief of these things. So it's why a lot of us at the end of the day feel like we need a cocktail, right? Oh, we got to wind down the end of the day.
Do you do the walk?
I do the walk. I try to do the walk. I try to do the big thing I try to do is I'm a big early evening, work's done, cocktail, right? And so what I realize is like, change my mind into a different kind of cocktail. So now I make a fancy mocktail, right? Which is like a, soda water with a little cranberry and some limes. And I serve it in a nice Scotch glass. But what I do is I associate that with the relief, right? The end of the day, the wind down. And I can find myself conditioning my mind to be excited, just as excited on that mocktail as I am on the cocktail, right? But a lot of it is the first 28 days is going to be your hardest. But once you get it into there, you realize that like there's a lot you can do with habits, and you can reformat and kind of think of it as like a mind backdoor. It's like a backdoor to messing with your mind.
If there's one piece of advice that you've come up with on your own based on experience, or something that someone has given you that you've put in your back pocket that you pass off to others, and you'd like us to leave this podcast with. Tim Ferriss always asks the question, if you can write one thing on a billboard that would be your sort of last thing, what would it be?
This is always a fun one. This is not PG. So those of you who, it's probably maybe PG-13, but I always love this quote, and I think it now works more than ever. I don't know if I came up with it, but I certainly have been saying it for a long time. But I always say that the greatest part about not giving a fuck is not giving a fuck. And I think that's so important today, because we spend too much time worrying about what other people think about us, what other people kind of opinions are on us with Instagram, with likes and these things. And I think the greatest part about going through life, I mean, you could definitely context that in a bad way, but the reality is like, if we go about life and live the life we want to live, not because we want other people to think we're successful or think we're smart or think those things, but just because we want to live that life, it really sets us free. And when you realize is most of life's trappings are stupid, right? Like, who gives a shit if your shirt says Prada or if it says Banana Republic? Like, it doesn't matter. Who gives a shit if you have a watch and it tells time if it's a Rolex or a Seiko? I don't even know. Seiko? What is
Seiko.
Seiko.
Got it.
But like at the end of the day, when you realize and you go back, and if you had someone who came from like, it doesn't matter. The problem is we get caught in these trappings. And you realize, you say like, what are the things that matter? What do I want to do? Who do I want to be? What do I want my grandkids to say about me? What are those things? Because your grandkids, if your grandkids say he always wore Prada shirts, then you probably have some other problems, right? That's not what you want to be remembered for. And so I always say like, again, the greatest part about not giving a fuck is not giving a fuck. And when you go through life and you say like, look, I live me. Now, you can get that into a dangerous spot as well. And that when you become too self, you feel the world is around you, that could be another problem. But I really feel like the world could benefit from stop being so concerned around living your FOMO fake life and just living a life that has you going to bed with a smile on your face. And it's actually not that difficult and doesn't require that much money to, go for a walk in the woods with your family. You come back with a big smile and you realize you didn't spend a lot of money.
I like it. Last question I ask everybody. Do you believe that you were born with an innate / inherent ability to get to where you're at today? Or do you think you were made over time through sheer grind, grit, and determination?
Well, so I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to say
Don't say both. I'll kill you.
Okay, so I think Warren Buffett's quote of winning the genetic lottery, or the what does he always say? Selling around like, hey, I was born in America to great kids in a free society, where you had the opportunity to excel. I think, and certainly when you look at a lot of the conversation of Black Lives Matter and stuff, like a lot of, I would be naive if I said a lot of the things that have helped me on my success are predetermined before I even showed up. But I do think a lot of life for me has been made, and I think that it started with my parents and their mindset and how my parents went around living their life, and I hope that I can translate that to my kids. But I do think as a society, we always have to realize that a lot of the things that we take for granted are the things that we didn't really have a decision in. And I think, we're dealing with a broader, I think rightfully so, we're dealing with that while we may not see it as kind of, I may not see it as like, oh, I'm self-made, I did all the work. There's a lot of gifts that were given to me that, I think is our obligation as a society to continue leveling that playing field. And I think there's opportunity not only to level that playing field here in the US, but I think as we think about a world society, how do we level that playing field? When you think, one of the greatest lines I've ever heard is that if you're in the worst position in the US and you were standing in a line and you were one of the bottom rings of the US from an economic standpoint, and you're standing in line, you're still at the front quarter of that entire line, right? And that means that, like, you look at America versus the rest of the world, and you look at third world countries, is there's a lot that we just need to, I think, level as humans. So a lot of opportunity there. So that's a long answer. I like to think that I've put a lot of energy and efforts into the person I become. I like to think that I know I still have a lot more efforts to put in that. And I think people can change. I think people can evolve. They can change. And I think the great thing about where we sit today is, like, look, just because you've been given a crappy hand doesn't, that hand can change. And you'll learn as a poker player, you'll learn more from playing bad hands than you will from playing good hands. Because good hands sometimes makes you think you're smarter than you are, whereas the bad hands you really have to work for, right? And I think that I guess if there's one of the things people can hold on today is that, like, look, this too shall pass. We will get through this. The things that we learn from this, the things that we empower, and again, similar to your waiting and shit, these moments, if you sit back and say, this is a moment for me to learn in, this is a moment for me to change, this is for me to grow. And it's not a comfortable one, but this is when change happens. And I can say for myself personally, the greatest lessons I learned came at the hardest time in my life. And only looking backwards did I realize that really was quintessential and game-changing for me. And the only thing I was open enough to do is to embrace the moment and to grind on through. And I think that's going to be a challenge for a lot of people here, and that's a challenge for, literally as we sit today, the entire world, right? To embrace this moment, to grind through. How do we come out of this as a better world, as a better society? I really believe we can, and I think we'll make some great strides in that.
Mike, with your help and feeding people healthy food, I'm sure that the future is incredibly bright for you and your wife and your kids. And I can't wait to see Freshly hit the S&P, because I know it will. I put money on that for sure. Dude, you are such a sharp guy, and you're articulate, and I'm honored to have you on this podcast. I really, I'm stoked for everything that you guys have been working on and for and towards, and your whole entire team over at Freshly. And man, thank you so much for being here with me. Really appreciate it.
Perfect. I appreciate it. If any of the listeners are interested, freshly.com, check us out. It's a great service. Thanks a ton for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
You're the man. I appreciate you. And for all those out there, check out Freshly, because it is really, really good, and they are best in class in the genre of food and home delivery. You're the man, Mike. Have a great rest of your day.